Hi friends, host Eric here, talking with famous people, my beloved Rachel beside me as usual, and today I'm making a quick video on operationalizing definitions. So the thing is, one thing that's become increasingly clear to me is that a lot of the conflicts we have in terms of arguments with people about typology or anything else is that there's a tendency by some parties to wish to non-operationalize language and by other parties to operationalize it. What does this term mean? And can we have some examples to make it clear? One example is the term unconscious. When we normally ask somebody, what is an unconscious function, what does that mean? You might get an answer like, well, it's a function you're not aware of. But that is not an operationalized definition of it. The definition I use is it's an aspect of attention that you have difficulty recalling instances of. So, for example, one of my most unconscious functions is eighth, extroverted sensing. So I might have trouble answering the question, can you come up with a time when you took real action when you should have talked? Because to be an extroverted intuitor means I'm always talking instead of taking real action by default, so much so that when I do take real action, it happens unconsciously and I don't notice it. Anyway, here's another example of operationalizing a definition. So the point is, in the first instance, now unconscious means something that we can use to help identify somebody's type in a testable, usable, operating way, right? The same thing is true in this funny, silly little poll question. Which word, what I'm really saying is, what word do you have the most trouble spelling? Which is the word that you misspell a lot? But if I ask the question, which word do you have the most trouble spelling? When you're looking at the words, you don't have trouble spelling any of them. Because, after all, you have the spelling right in front of your eyes. So, the reality is, well, at the moment, I don't have trouble spelling any of them. If you want to operationalize the definition, you say this: which word most likely gets you redlined by spell check? In other words, when you attempt to spell this or when you're writing something, what do you think is most highest percentage of the time when you attempt the word that you get redlined? That's operationalizing a definition.
But what if you don't use the word bourgeoisie a lot? Because, I would spell that.
Well, because I wanted to keep the poll question short, I didn't express it quite as precisely as I could have, which would have said, which of these words produces the highest percentage of red lines per attempt?
Conscience.
So, in other words, even though you might not attempt to say bourgeoisie very often when you're writing, it always gets you redlined.
Mm-hmm.
It always gets me redlined. It always does. Conscience, I don't have a problem with anymore. I every time I write it, I say in my head conscience.
Yeah, me too.
Maintenance, I think I've gotten it down now, but for years I would redline maintenance every time I tried to write that fucking word. Rachel's equivalent of that is exercise. And so we included that one in there. So we'll see what you think about this. But the core takeaway is, if we want to do stuff with language that's meaningful, we have to operationalize our definitions, especially when we're talking about personality type stuff. If you want to know what it means to extrovertedly intuit, I've got to give you a definition that you can use to check something and say, does it match the criteria set by the definition? No. Okay, I can eliminate that as an example of it. So, for example, digging a hole is one way to pay attention. It's not consistent to call that way of paying attention extroverted intuition with our definitions of extroverted intuition because we have operationalized them. In other words, extroverted intuition is not, being a crazy idea guy who's now digging a hole. Extroverted intuition is instead a way of paying attention that is ideating rather than acting on the physical world. So if one does dig a hole and one is an extroverted intuitor, one's probably not paying any attention to the hole digging while one's doing it. One's thinking about something else entirely. Regardless, the point is having definitions that allow us to meaningfully apply the definition towards something in a way that you know what it is you're talking about. So in this case, instead of just saying, what are you most likely to misspell, which is a tricky question to answer because then it really comes into the thing that Rachel says, well, I'm not likely to attempt to spell bourgeoisie very often. So that's why it's better to say, which gets you the highest percentage of red lines per attempt, which is would have been an even more operationalized way for me to ask this question. And hopefully this provides some insight into how we can avoid most of the fights and arguments and stuff that we have by simply agreeing that regardless of whether you have to operationalize a definition or need to, that if this dispute between us using words is going to go anywhere or accomplish anything, then we'll have to agree to operationalize our definitions so that we can do things with each other's words as well as our own. And that's one to grow on.
Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.